Hey folks, we're sponsored today by the new podcast called Missing Richard Simmons. 3 years ago, fitness guru Richard Simmons disappeared from the public eye. He had spent decades as one of the most accessible celebrities in the world, but in the last few years, almost no one has seen him and no one knows why he left. Filmmaker Dan Taberski was a friend of Richard's, and Missing Richard Simmons is Dan's personal search for his friend. The deeper Dan digs, the stranger it gets. Subscribe now to Missing Richard Simmons in Stitcher or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're also sponsored by Squarespace. With the help of Squarespace, tackling your next move might not be as difficult as it seems. Whether you are hoping to start a business, change careers, or launch a new creative project, Squarespace gives you the ability to create an online platform from which to make your next big idea known to the world. Start your free trial today at squarespace.com and enter offer code WTF to get 10% off your first purchase plus a free domain. All right? All right. Let's do the show.
Lock the gate!
All right, let's do this. How are you, what the fuckers, what the fuck buddies, what the fucking ears, what the fucknicks, what the fuck publicans, what the fuckocrats, what's happening? I am Marc Maron. This is WTF. This is my podcast. You're listening to it. I assume it's not the first time, so welcome. Welcome back. And if it is your first time, welcome for the first time. How are you? What's going on? Today, my guest is Will Arnett from Arrested Development and many other things. Also, he's got his show on Netflix called Flaked. He's the voice of the Lego Batman, which is very popular with the adults and children alike. So I'll be talking to him in a little while. But, you know, I spent years not making this a political show and making it a human show. And I'd like to continue making it a human show. But, things have gotten very urgent. But let's assume that there will be other elections. Let's assume that this is not the president for life situation. Let's assume that the process will pick up again in a couple of years in some of these special elections. Let's assume that. Just to, indulge me. We found out about this new group because they have the same name as us. They're called WTF, but for them it stands for Win the Future. Their whole point is to turn all this energy that you see in the streets and at town halls and on social media into election results next year. There's a lot of work to do, and there are more than 2,500 critical competitive races in states across the country. So if you're wondering how you can get involved in an active way, this WTF group has set up a way where you can get involved where you're needed most. The website is volunteer.wtf. Their switchboard is now active and matching volunteers with campaigns around the country. So go get involved at volunteer.wtf. And I've been thinking a lot, when I take time away from my phone and the sort of the panic of refreshing your browser about, personally, what is horrifying to me. Outside of politics and what politicians do and how they're fucking with people, is that I've been through elections before. I've been through different presidencies before. And the fact is that, look, I talk to people for a living. I've always talked to people for a living. Basically, that's what I've done, whether it's on stage or for the past 8 or 9 years, one-on-one here, intimately. And I've always had to believe, and I still do believe, that when you sit down with somebody one-on-one, that you can talk to a human being, that you can talk to a person, that if you put aside ideological matters, political matters, that, we share more than we don't, that we have things in common more than we don't, that our frustrations are probably more similar than they aren't. How we resolve them and who we are personally in our fear or our anger or our desperation or our hopelessness or our excitement or fury or vulnerability is common where we're human beings. And I like that dialogue. A lot is learned from people over the course of this show. Many people without designation politically and without even, not even knowing where they come from. I get emails all the time about the struggles of, whether it's drug addiction, psychological problems, anger, financial issues, dark times of whatever kind or another, who feel uplifted by hearing other people talk about personal things. That's what being a human is for, to, sort of carry the weight and burden and be there to listen to other people. And it just fucking terrifies me that we're not going to be able to get back to that, even with our differences. That becomes frightening. There is a frenzy towards negligence in the name of money and power that has very little to do with most of us. Hey, I know the news makes it hard to get out of bed lately, and so if you're stuck under the covers curled up in the fetal position, why not do it on a Casper? The Casper is an obsessively engineered mattress at a shockingly fair price. Its supportive memory foams create an award-winning sleep surface with just the right sink and just the right bounce, which is why it was on Time Magazine's Best Inventions list. Try Casper for 100 nights risk-free in your own home. If you don't love it, they'll pick it up and refund you everything. Casper understands the importance of truly sleeping on a mattress before you commit, especially considering you're going to spend a third of your life on it. They offer free shipping and returns to the U.S. and Canada, and with more than 20,000 reviews and an average of 4.8 stars, it's quickly becoming the internet's favorite mattress. Get $50 toward any mattress purchase by visiting Casper.com/WTF and using offer code WTF. Terms and conditions apply. That's Casper.com/WTF. Use the code WTF. So I get this email. It just says, from a fan. Hey, Mark, there's a pretty good chance this will get drowned out, but it's worth a shot. I want to ask you, how is it that you create such an intimate experience for the people you interview? There's truth in all your interviews, and that's what's captivated me from the first episode I heard. I'm doing an assignment where I choose to do some community journalism, and I want to ditch the Q&A format. There's no longer any truth in it. Do you think that the way you conduct interviews could ever be translated into other kinds of journalism? I really hope so. Anyways, if there's any advice that you could give me on how to allow people to converse in other places as fluidly as they do in the garage, I'm very interested in hearing it. I've been a fan for maybe 7 years now, and your honesty provided something very special that teenagers don't get from adults very often. I'm headed off to college soon, and you've provided valuable insight, and I'm sure will help guide my creative intentions for the rest of my life. I want to thank you and wish you all the best. Many respects, Jose. Jose, I've been conducting these type of conversations throughout my life. And if I really trace the roots of it, is that I think when I was younger, like when I was in high school, I didn't have a real concept of a lot of things, like, what I was supposed to do, who I was supposed to be, who I was, what my interests were specifically. And, my father was not that attentive, really. So I found myself kind of hanging around places and talking to people that seemed like they knew those things, who they were, what they wanted to do, what the world was about, how to be funny and take life on life's terms, kind of own it. So I would hang around bookstores, restaurants, record shops, guitar shops in my neighborhood and just, listen to people talking and talk to them and ask them questions and sort of, just listen to how people navigate their interests and the world. It would make me feel better to be around people that seem to have a handle on shit. And I've done that all my life. So I think that, I don't consider what I do journalism, but I think that, again, if you approach people as people, if you approach somebody knowing what you want to talk to them about, maybe, talk to them about something else for a few minutes first. Ask them questions that involve the immediate environment or what's happening. I don't know what the setting is, maybe say like, I don't quite understand this. And, maybe before I ask you this general question about a general thing, maybe you could educate me on something, and then get a little back and forth going about the nuances of a particular topic. And don't be afraid to do follow-up questions. There are certain moments in a conversation where you pick up an instinct where people just sort of blow by a detail. But if anything during what somebody is saying to you, as they just move by it, seems like something that has more to it, and you're interested in that, or it piques your interest, get into that. Ask them what they mean by it. Have a conversation. That's the best that I can offer, and that's the way that you find common ground, and also you get information. Just try to talk to people. If it's not pressing or groundbreaking, or there's not breaking news, just try to talk to the person that you're talking to, and you'll make what you want to know sort of secondary, and see if it comes up organically. Look, I can't teach a journalism class, but if you've got the time, that's what I would do. Hey, have you figured out your next move yet? You ready to launch that business or sell your art or get your creative project out into the world? Well, Squarespace is the way you can make your next move a reality. Top musicians, designers, artists, and restaurants use Squarespace to create a professional online platform. And it's easy to do with Squarespace's award-winning templates. You can add and arrange your content and features just by dragging and dropping and clicking. There's nothing to install or upgrade ever, and their 24/7 customer support can help you with any problem, anytime. So whether you need a landing page, a beautiful gallery, a professional blog, or an online store, tackle your next move with Squarespace. Start your free trial today at squarespace.com and enter offer code WTF to get 10% off your first purchase, plus a free domain. That's WTF for 10% off your first purchase. Squarespace, make your next move. Make your next website. So I guess I talked to Will a few days ago, and I guess I should preface this because, it was the day that the North Korean government launched a test missile. So that there's a bit of thematic underlying stuff there. That was the subtext of my conversation with Will. Also, Will is the voice of Batman in the Lego Batman movie, currently the #1 movie in the country. This is me and Will Arnett. What's happening, Will? I haven't talked to you in a long time.
I know.
Has it been I didn't realize, do you live by me? Where do you live? Over there?
I live over there. Yeah.
You do?
Yeah. I live in the shit, as we say. I mean, it's a little different from the actual shit from Vietnam, but
it's you mean the nice shit?
It's the nice shit. Yeah.
Yeah. The place where the elite live.
I suppose I'm right in. I'm cozy with the Hollywood elite, and it's where they put signs up excusing the lack of green grass on the boulevards because of the drought.
Really?
That's
please forgive our appearance, but we're all hurting.
Yeah,
that kind of thing.
Something like that.
What where do you come from, man? I don't really I realized when I was trying to do research, which I'm not good at, that I know nothing about you. You're just a funny man that appears in things.
I kind of appeared out of nowhere.
Really?
Yeah. Even people that I sort of know, you and I don't know each other that well, but when people say, I didn't know that, I'm like, thanks for Googling me. Jesus Christ, you could find out a lot about me in 2 seconds.
Sure. Well, you can do that, but I have had experiences where I'll Google somebody and it's all wrong.
Really?
Definitely. There was, I think it was Pam Adlon. I had Googled her because I was going to talk to her, and there was just all this information about someone who was her father and her stepfather, and none of it was real.
Wait, what kind of sordid past does Pam Adlon have? None of it?
She didn't.
Yeah.
But I thought she was connected to someone who was in the film business or a director. It just turned out, as I talked to her, that a good chunk of the information on her Wikipedia page was bullshit.
You've probably talked to or thought about this a million times.
What?
I love the people when some sort of news item drops about somebody, they die or whatever.
Yeah.
And the people who are ready to alter the Wikipedia page to that effect.
Who are they?
Who the fuck are they? What are they doing?
I don't know how mine appeared.
No.
I don't know who's in charge of it or who did you make yours?
No, I have nothing to do with it. I have zero idea. And what I love is the idea. Honestly, if you watch the next time like a celebrity dies, the second you find out about it, go to Wikipedia.
And someone's done it.
Because you'll get like a breaking news thing or whatever. And just if you can think about it, go to Wikipedia and it'll be there. And he died on January 12th.
Already.
And you're like, what the fuck?
Yeah, I don't know who does, like, who are the people that are overseeing it? I don't even know how it works, to be honest with you.
No.
Will. I wish I did. I know that the idea is anyone can do it, but there's some sort of oversight somewhere eventually.
Well, it gives you pause when you start thinking that is possible, that anybody can go do it, and it calls into question the sort of the legitimacy of anything that we read, right?
That's happening on a large scale now.
On a very large scale. But this has been happening for a long time.
With Wikipedia?
With Wikipedia. And you have to, in a court of law, it's the old, if a witness is caught lying, immediately the lawyers will say, sorry, but this person's credibility is called, and everything they now say henceforth has to be taken with a grain of salt.
Right.
And if you apply that to what's going on right now, you'd think that people would kind of wise up, and yet they don't seem to want to.
No, we can't even begin to. We'll just go down a dark hole that has validity and a lot of definition. But let's keep it personal and go down that pit of insanity.
Here's what we know about me that's true.
Where do you come
I'm
from?
Canadian born.
You are
Born in Toronto.
Are you leaving? Are you going back?
No, not anytime soon.
Why is that about Canadians? Like, even when shit gets real here and shit gets ugly here, you're just sort of like, nope.
Well, I'm sure that there's a lot of, on a professional level, it's difficult for me to do the things that I want to do there.
Sure.
There are a lot of great artists and a lot of great things that happen there. And now I feel safe having said that.
Yeah.
But I sort of realized at a very young age that if I wanted to be an actor and have, realize my dreams, whatever the fuck they were, they're different now, but that I was going to have to leave.
Well, how big is your family? What do you got? Brothers and sisters?
I have two sisters.
Older?
Older.
Really?
Yeah.
Are they there?
They're there. They're 3 years older, and
they have kids and everything. You got nephews, and
one of them has kids, and and she has 2 boys, and they live on the street that I grew up on.
Really?
Yeah.
In Toronto.
In Toronto. She lived. That sister lived in the States for a long time, and both her kids were born in Brooklyn, and she just moved back a few years ago.
Are your folks still there? Are they around?
Yeah, my folks are still there. They're around.
Really?
Yeah, and I see my folks quite a bit.
You do?
Yeah.
They come out here
a lot
because of the kids.
Because of the kids, and because I'm really close with my family.
Really?
And my mom will probably text during this as we were talking. She texts me a lot. Yeah.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, it's really good. I'm really lucky in that my parents aren't. They've been very considering that. My dad's pretty conservative in a lot of ways.
What's he do?
He's retired now. He was for many years. He was a corporate lawyer.
Yeah, was he on the one of the good guys or the bad guys?
Well, it depends on who you ask. He worked on a.
That's true.
For many years, he was a senior partner in arguably Canada's biggest law firm. And he did a lot of, his specialty was mergers and acquisitions.
Yeah.
So he worked on a lot of big deals around the globe, and he traveled a lot when I was a kid. And
you always got along with him throughout all of that?
I did. But, he worked a lot.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that as an indictment. It was just, that's what you did.
Yeah, my dad did that too.
Yeah.
And your mom would cover for him.
My mom would
He'll be home sometime.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was... But I don't have, I didn't like pop into a therapist chair at age 25 and say, God damn it, my dad wasn't around.
Yeah.
It's just the way it was. Having said that, he was great when he could be.
Sure.
And we were very close. Actually, in a lot of ways, my dad and I got closer probably when I graduated high school.
Yeah.
And I was kind of at a place where I was trying to decide what I wanted to do. You say to your parents, you want to be an actor, especially my parents. I went to all boys boarding school. My dad went to Harvard.
So you grew up with some bread, and you were, there.
Yes.
You definitely had all the options available to you, and you could have, given that pedigree, the trajectory could have been some big business.
For sure. I have a lot of friends who have gone into banking, et cetera.
Yeah.
A lot. And
when you were in high school, were you acting and shit?
I was trying to. I left boys boarding school. I was asked not to return.
Oh, good. So they uninvited you.
Yeah.
What'd you do to deserve that? That sounds like I was kicked out of a private school at one time as well.
It's a badge of honor, right?
That's great.
Yeah.
I just got kicked out for being a smartass. It wasn't even a respected like prep school.
Right.
It was the shit. It was like the secondary one.
What part of the world was that?
In Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Oh, okay.
But like there was the kind of private school, the academy, and then there was sort of like, Sandia Prep. That's where, I was always the kid. It's sort of like, well, he doesn't pay attention and he seems creative, but he's bright.
Same here.
Yeah, let's put him in this one.
Same here. Not reaching his potential.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Sweet. Doesn't seem to pay attention.
No, doesn't pay attention. And for good reason when you look back. I think in a lot of ways. It's funny, not to digress too much, but my own kids, watching them, they're in school now. They're in first and second grade. And, I'm pretty involved at their school, and looking at their curriculum now versus what it used to be, the way that they actually teach things like math, it's much less, they stress less on memorization and things like that we used to,
right.
The way we learned it. And it's much more about using your own sort of,
you mean learning it?
Yeah, learning it. Your own inherent cognitive skills, like and applying that to and using things like reason. And it's much more engaging in that way.
I could never fucking wrap my brain around algebra.
No.
Like geometry was okay. Shapes I could handle. But like it stopped there. I mean, chemistry couldn't fucking manage it.
It's just memorization of boring shit.
I guess, but the way things work together, I mean, it would have helped if someone could have taught me how it worked. But yeah, it is. It's like, they're like puzzles.
Yeah.
I just can't do it. I don't know if I had the patience or ADD, attention deficit disorder. I don't think I do. Because I can get pretty obsessed and focused when I want to. When I feel compelled, when I'm terrified.
Yeah. So imagine, right. So imagine if somebody had built the drama in geometry or in algebra for you. Maybe you would have been.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. So you were a problem kid or what?
To an extent, I was a smart ass.
Yeah.
And I was,
getting big laughs?
Smoking in the woods. I was getting big laughs. I still remember some big laughs.
You do?
Sure.
What's the big laugh?
Oh, gosh, I don't know. Every once in a while, I'll think about some...
Like prep school laughs?
Yeah, just something that...
Where you completely undermine the authority structure?
Constantly.
Yeah, they can't... There's no tolerance for that eventually.
Constantly. And I would have, back in the day, a lot of the... And I think this has changed a lot, but back then, a lot of the guys, the men who became teachers in boys' boarding schools out in the middle of fucking nowhere, Canada...
Yeah.
You have to think that some of those people are pretty depressed and have given up.
Right. You think so, but I mean, there are people that want to teach.
Yes, there are some. I will say that there are some, and I had some fantastic teachers.
Yeah.
But there were a couple who resented the student body, who were like, these are a bunch of rich little kids.
Yeah.
And fuck them.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna be the one to grind them down. And their parents aren't around, and I'm gonna have my foot is gonna be on Arnett's throat every fucking day.
Yeah.
And I got into it once. I went away when I was 12.
Yeah.
And so when I was
it's a boarding school.
And it's way up north.
Uniforms,
and so I was 12 years old, and I had my shit was all over my room. I was 12.
Yeah.
And my housemaster, as he was called, had told me a couple of times, you got to clean up your shit. And I was like, yeah. So I came back one day from class, and all my shit was packed into his car. And he said, hop in. And he drove me 6 miles away.
Yeah.
And I had like 6 garbage bags or 4 garbage bags full of shit.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, you'll clean up your shit now. And he dropped me on the road there, and it was middle of winter. And these bags were heavy, and I had to I was like, what the fuck am I going to do? And I thought, what an asshole.
It's your clothes and everything?
Clothes and everything, and just shit, right?
Yeah.
So at first I was like, all right, this is one of my, so I take 2 of the bags and go 100 yards, go back and get the other 2. And this is untenable. So I sat there for a second and felt sorry for myself. And then I got the idea and I started putting everything on.
Yeah.
Like the Michelin Man. And then I was tucking everything in, and I had all sorts of shit. And I managed to wear everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I must have looked insane.
Yeah.
And I did it. And I walked back, and I walked back in, record time, and I came back, and the look on his face, he was so pissed that I had figured out an easy way to do it. And in my mind, I'm thinking, like, this is brilliant. Yeah. He should be celebrating.
You were
me.
learning. That was
learning.
Actual learning. Applied cognitive skills.
And he was so pissed at me. I still remember that guy.
He wanted you to walk back somehow?
He wanted me to walk back and have to drag them. He also did this thing where, I forgot what it was, but we had gone to this thing and we had bought a bunch of food and we hadn't okayed it or whatever.
Yeah.
And he wanted us to write letters to our parents saying sorry that we had bought all this food.
Right.
Like cheeseburgers and shit, and charged it to our thing.
What the fuck are your parents doing? I mean, were you like
Well, my parents didn't, so my parents find out and they're like, that's fine. We're happy that you got some food and whatever. But this guy was like, fuck these guys.
Yeah.
So he said, I want you each one of you has to write a letter to your parents apologizing. And then I'm going to okay them. I'll look at the letter before you send them off. So knowing that he was going to write it, that he was going to read it, I wrote this letter that was just an indictment of him.
Yeah.
And I said, Mom and Dad, I'm so sorry, but obviously Mr. Shalou, et cetera, and I just ripped into him. And I left it at his door. He came flying in. He said, you little fucking... And I said, how dare you? That's a correspondence between me and my parents. You're violating federal law. And I was like,
Yeah. And did he send it?
No, he made me redo it. I was admittedly, it was, now that I say it out loud, it's a dicky thing to do, and yet I still maintain that it was.
You had to.
It was funny.
Yeah, sure. You got to like kind of prod those guys
for sure,
so you can see what they're really made of.
Yeah.
And so what happens? You go through all of high school at that place?
So no, I leave there and I go to high school.
What made them kick you out? Just a collection of things?
Yeah, just a collection. Literally same thing. Just being a smart ass.
Yeah.
And they didn't say you're kicked out, but at the end of 10th grade, they said, we'll see you later.
They recommended military school for me.
Really?
My parents would never do that.
No.
They're like, I remember there was a period where they were looking, maybe you should go here. Like they were so clueless.
Your parents were?
Kinda. They just, I don't think they were that engaged. They were like, well, go to that school. It should be fine. And then, when it comes down to it.
But maybe not. I mean, the fact that they didn't, if they were really clueless, they would have said, yeah, you're right. Okay, we'll send them to military school. At least they didn't do that.
Well, yeah, they weren't disciplinarian, that's for sure. But I don't ever remember them helping me with homework or anything. I don't ever remember, what's going on in school.
It's a different world. My kids said to me a few months ago, I picked them up and, do the carpool lane. And one of my sons said, John Michael's mom, she comes in. She doesn't do carpool. She comes into the class and gets him. And as I'm driving, I'm like leaning over. I'm saying, hey, Granddad didn't even know where my school was. I never saw my dad at my school ever.
Yeah, me neither, unless they were called in.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. Did you ever? I remember I had a drunk electronics teacher.
Really?
Like there was I had 3 drunks for teachers.
It was much more acceptable back then for teachers to be drunk.
You could just smell them drunk.
Yeah, I don't know if I ever smelled, but I knew that there were teachers who drank because they lived on campus.
Yeah.
Who drank at night.
You want me to check and see if the missiles have been launched?
Yeah. That's at any moment, right?
God, I hope not. But it's a sad fucking state of affair that we've got to... not yet. Not that I've got. You got... What do you got? Anything?
Let me see. Nothing yet. I feel like...
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
No, I feel like we're good.
We're good for now? Okay. So what... So,
it's
okay.
the world we live in.
Oh, I can't...
I know.
I'm having a hard time dealing with it.
Yeah, me too.
I can't imagine it. I just can't, like, anyone who's, like, connected, intensely to what's happening. I can't imagine anyone going, like, this is good. It's going well.
There's no way.
But let's get back to Canada. And, like, I think Toronto's a great city. The difference I always notice is, like, this feels like a real city without the menace
Yes.
Like,
yes.
like, you see people sitting on park benches at 12 at night, just taking it in. And I'm like, what's happening?
Yeah, no, there's nothing happening. And it's funny, since I've left Toronto, there are people, including my parents, who will say, "Oh, no, they had some shootings." It's almost like they're trying to validate its status as a real down and dirty city. I used to make this, it's a stretch calling it a joke, but I would say a lot of people will say that Toronto is a clean New York, and I prefer to think of it as a dirty Winnipeg. But there's some truth to that, which is, as a kid growing up and as a teenager, there was never any fear that anything bad was going to happen.
Yeah, there's no edge to it. And right now I could use that. I would feel like it would be a pleasant few weeks if I wasn't terrified of my own people.
Well, it was true that I moved to New York in 1990. I was 20 years old.
So wait, let's go back then. So you get kicked out of the prep school. You go to a regular high school.
I went to a what they call an alternative school in Toronto.
Yeah.
Where I didn't really have classes per se, and it was all kind of essay based, and it was run through the Toronto Board of Education.
I love that when creative people actually go to those schools where you sort of do what you want. How is that going to end up well?
It did. It turned out okay for me. Yeah. I'm here.
You just like it was like it
was kind of like this. I was drinking coffee and talking to people. I mean, I've been doing this for 40, 35 years, whatever it is.
Yeah, I guess it helps you learn who you are. It doesn't give you any practical skills for life, but
not if I were to want to do anything other than what I'm doing.
Which is a gamble.
It was a big gamble.
It worked out.
I said to my dad recently, I said, who knew that goofing off was going to pay off so well?
Yeah. What'd he say?
He agreed, reluctantly. But I went to this school and I studied theater, and I was able to get credit for it. And
you studied it on your own or with a guy?
No, I went to there was an actual theater in Toronto called Tarragon Theater, and they had a sort of a studio component there where they had, and my godmother ran this school. She was a good friend of my mom's, and she's still around. And my Aunt Judith, and she's ill right now, but she's one of the more influential people in my life. And she was the person who actually kind of really got me interested in learning in a different way. And I sort of rue the fact that didn't happen earlier, because she encouraged me to read. She'd say, "Oh, don't just read The Sun Also Rises. Read all of Hemingway and tell me." And I just did it on my own, and I discovered things like reading became such an important part of my life because I was encouraged to do it and to engage in a way that.
This is by your aunt?
Yeah.
Oh, it's nice to have one of those influences. The sort of creative, intellectual push.
Yeah, for sure. And who, when I'm 16 and I say, I think I want to be an actor, she's like, "That's great.
Yeah.
And here's what you should do."
Yeah.
And
don't tell your parents.
And don't tell your parents. And well, I'm looking for sort of official certification that this is the right move.
Right.
And that was a great move for me, going there and learning with her, and it was a good time in my life.
What was the theater like? I mean, what did you do?
It was good.
There?
You know what's funny? I took a class there. It was monologue writing.
Yeah.
And there was a guy in my class who was writing these bizarro monologues, and they were really funny, and he performed them himself. And I was 16, and he was probably 25 or 22.
Yeah.
And he's trying to be an actor, a comedian, etc. And one day between, like on a smoke break, because I was already a heavy smoker.
When did you start?
13 or
yeah.
something.
What, Canadian cigarettes?
Yeah.
Which ones?
Players Light.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. They're good.
I used to like getting exotic cigarettes. Like I was
Export A and Demore.
Yeah. But I never liked the taste of them. They're too much.
I smoked these. I quit.
Still smoke them.
Well, I quit and then I'm back, and I'm kind of like on my last.
What are those?
These are Marlboro Golds from Europe. That's all I'll smoke. For a while, I was like, I'm only going to smoke those because I can't get my hands on them, and then I just had people muling them for me. Anytime I hear about somebody going to Europe, I'd be like, "Hey, can you give them $40 to grab me some smokes?" It's fucking terrible.
So you're smoking and you're talking.
And I'm talking to this guy, and he says, "Why don't you come down? You should come down next weekend. We're doing. I've got this comedy group, and we're doing some sketches at the Riv.
Yeah.
in Toronto. And I was like, yeah, sounds great.
Yeah.
What are you guys called? The Kids in the Hall. And it was Mark McKinney.
That's who was talking to you?
And I took a monologue writing class. He doesn't know. He has no idea who I am, I'm sure. And
Today, I think, or at that time. He probably knows who you are now.
Maybe. But, you know, I was 16 and he was in my class.
Yeah.
And
was he funny?
Oh, my God. He was so funny. He was the star of the class.
Yeah.
And he was absurd.
Yeah.
And I loved how absurd he was.
Yeah.
I had an appreciation for that.
So what'd you do? Wait, you go to the Kids in the Hall show?
I didn't go. I've had so many things like that happen. I had years later in New York. I lived in a building on Hudson Street, right across from the Holland Tunnel.
Yeah.
And the guy living upstairs from me, it was terrible.
Yeah.
The building's not even there anymore.
Yeah.
It was rat infest, and it was before like that area was cool.
Yeah.
We used to call the neighborhood work.
Yeah.
The only people who went there were people who went to work in those that are buildings that are all condos now.
Right.
And the guy upstairs from me was Damien Loeb, this painter.
Yeah.
Who kind of had a moment 15 years ago.
Right.
But he and I, my roommate worked at Goldman Sachs. Mm-hmm. And so he paid more rent than I did. And then Damien and I would spend the day smoking cigarettes. And his art at that time consisted of, he'd take high def. He was one of the first guys I knew who had a high def camera and television. High def videos of himself having sex with his Asian girlfriend, and then he'd make paintings of that. So I loved going to his studio.
Yeah.
It was great. Right upstairs.
Just watching him fuck people on camera.
Yeah, it was amazing. And he had a buddy of his, same thing. He's a DJ. I'm a DJ. Come see us play, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And I'm good, Moby.
Yeah.
Same thing.
So Moby was hanging around? That must have been when he was just starting out, because I think Moby's from Connecticut.
Yeah.
Like, he, you know.
And so's Damien. Maybe that's where they knew each other. But I didn't really know him. And he was definitely, he didn't have a record deal or anything.
Sure. And then he made 2 records and made enough money to live the rest of 4 lives.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, man.
That's a fucking racket. That's the business.
Yeah.
I mean, there's guys that did 1 record, 2 songs even.
Yeah.
I'm good.
Back in that sweet spot, right before it went away, that was it.
All right, so you wanted to be a serious actor.
Yeah, so I moved to New York and I studied at Lee Strasberg.
Oh, you did? So after the theater thing, how old were you when you moved to New York? Like,
20.
Oh, really? So you're like, I'm out.
I went to college for half a year and I dropped out, Concordia University in Montreal. And I got to college, and I remember it was right around Christmas time.
Yeah.
And I remember all I was doing was partying like everybody else.
Sure.
And I remember thinking, this is it. I really did. And not like some fucking visionary or anything. I was 19 years old and I thought, what else? I'm just going to kind of do this and then move back to Toronto. And a lot of the people I grew up with were there in Montreal at college. And then everybody's going to go back to Toronto and just be friends forever in the same group. Yeah. Sort of upper middle class white kids.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh my God, this is a nightmare. And I got to get out of here.
Yeah.
And I remember calling my parents from a payphone.
Yeah.
There used to be a thing called a payphone where you'd go and you'd put money in just for the listeners.
Yeah, and they were kind of dirty.
They were kind of dirty, yeah. And they had stuff carved.
I see some of them around sometimes. I'm like, wow, look at that.
I saw 2 in New York last week.
Yeah.
Bizarre.
It is weird.
Well, one of them didn't have a phone in it,
Sure.
but I used it to make a call because it was quiet.
Right.
And it was out of the way.
Or light a cigarette.
Yeah.
I used to duck into payphones to do 1-hits off of weed.
Sure. Oh, the one hitter.
Oh, the best.
Oh, the best.
God damn it.
So I called my parents
So
and
you
I said,
had
I'm out.
the white light moment.
Yeah.
You saw your death through mundanity.
And exactly. And I, to my dad's credit, he said, okay. I said, I got to do this. And they said, well, what are you proposing? And I said, I got to go and go to New York. It was always going to be New York.
Yeah.
And they said, okay, well, you're going to have to come back. And I got a job for 6 months.
Yeah.
In Toronto to make enough money so that I could move to New York.
What was the job?
I was selling paper towel and toilet paper and stuff like that. This guy I knew started this company.
Really?
Yeah. Do you remember? Do you remember? Oh, not do you remember? They still exist. It's that Swedish company that says it's Torque or something. Mm-hmm. And you pull the paper down from the middle. It's like a big round dispenser. Mm-hmm. And
Oh, yeah.
And then some of the toilet paper rolls
Sure.
are huge rolls.
Yeah, you see them in airports.
In
and
airports
things.
and shit. Yeah, and at the time, they were just coming to North America from Sweden.
Uh-huh.
And this guy got a distributorship or whatever, and I worked for him. He was a year older than me, and he had this company, and
you'd go to places and go, look at this.
Yeah, go to
try it. Go ahead, try
bars
it.
and restaurants and sell it to them, and then I'd install it as well. I was a one-man,
A one-man twerk installer?
So I'd go in, some restaurant would be like, okay, yeah, we want to switch over all our... And by the way, I knew nothing about installation, all that kind of shit.
Yeah.
And I had like a toolbox, and I go into their bathroom, and I'm like putting in drilling through tile. Like I just learned I'd fucking crack shit and whatever, and I'd ruin. And then, I just did it.
It's a commission gig?
It was a commission gig. And
so you were a good salesman?
I was decent.
Yeah.
I was decent.
You made enough to go to New York?
I made enough to move to New York for 1 year.
Yeah. And now you know about that company. What is it called? Torque? Torque. They're still around. Yeah.
TORQ, I think. Right?
Yeah, they're sort of problematic with toilet paper sometimes because if the end is not hanging out,
then you're screwed.
Yeah, it's hard to get
and
in
it's
there.
heavy, so you got to roll it with your
like,
hand.
I'm not happy with the product.
No, especially in a place where
I
you
want a refund, Will.
Well, where you want to touch the least amount of things as possible. I say to my kids now when we go into public, I'm like, don't touch anything.
Do what you got to do and make it to the sink.
Yeah.
And then air dry your hands.
And just do but just don't touch. So I did that.
Yeah.
And then I moved to New York.
And what was the plan? That was where you lived in the work neighborhood?
First I lived on the Upper East Side. I got an apartment I sublet an apartment from a girl who had been at Strasbourg, and she sublet it to me.
All right. So how did you get into that program?
I went down and met with them. Flew down to New York
before you went.
Before I went,
yeah.
And met with them, and then I went back. That was sort of like.
Did you audition, or who was it? Did you remember the teachers?
I don't remember the teacher then. I did like a monologue. I don't remember who the teacher was then, but I had a very influential teacher at Strasbourg.
Who was that?
Acting teacher, this guy, George Loros.
Yeah.
Loros. So I get in, I go back to Toronto.
Yeah.
I grab all my shit, which was nothing.
Yeah.
The first 5 years that I lived in New York, I moved a lot. I could move with one cab. Because I had like two bags. I had nothing.
And a futon?
Yeah. Barely. I didn't even own a bed at first.
Just go buy a futon. Buy a new futon. Throw it on the floor.
You know what? A futon mattress on the floor, I still, to this day, think that's the best sleeps I ever had.
You think so?
Yep. I had one on 21st Street for years. I lived on 21st Street between 7th and 8th.
Yeah.
And I remember those as being like the deepest sleeps. Maybe I had no worries back then.
Maybe. I mean, I remember the day I realized that futons were kind of a racket. Like you had your basic futon that got hard, over a year or so, which was pretty good. But then they started doing foam cores and layers, and I started to realize beds in general, I think it's some sort of scam.
Maybe, although people will argue, hey, listen, you spend a third of your life in bed, it should be that should be the highest ticket.
I remember
item.
when I got a very expensive futon frame, pulled it up off the floor, but my apartment on the Lower East Side was not really big enough to accommodate it spatially.
Yeah,
so one room was just the bed frame.
Sure.
Yeah.
I see now. I never liked the frame. They were never comfortable to me. So I just and I would roll it up during the day.
Yeah.
So I had more space.
Yeah. All right. So you're there 5 years. What are you doing?
Well, I'm there.
What'd you learn? What do you use now? What did you take with you? What's your technique and craft?
Yeah. The only thing I like talking about more than actor's craft is independent film.
Yeah. No, but I mean, it's like I talk to people that go to Strasbourg, and I've talked to actors, and they're, I guess it's all I believe that if you have some sort of talent for it, you have it. But I mean, you do learn something.
Well, yes, you do learn something, and I had a lot of I did have some good teachers. I had. You first start there, you're learning. It's all sense memory stuff. It's methods. All that kind of thing.
You could wrap your brain around that?
A little. At first, I thought, well, what the fuck is this shit? And then, you're sitting in a chair, and the whole point is to try to relax as much as you can on an uncomfortable chair.
Yeah. What in your mind, you're like, this can't be.
How is this going to help me be on Law and Order? But what it did do was it helped me kind of tap into the idea of sort of focusing on and concentrating on what I I guess, what I, being in the moment.
Yeah,
I suppose.
Sure.
But I had George Loris was great because when a lot of the other teachers were talking about the method and all these things that you in preparation, he would then say he'd been a working actor, he'd done a million things, and he said, "There's no set and there's no director who's going to wait for you to fucking get into fucking character. You got to be ready to go." And he was much more about the practical application,
right? And
his number one thing was about being sensitive to the material, and he was a really great teacher in that way. I remember him, this other guy guy and a girl were doing a scene. I forget what it was from. Yeah. And George would sit in the front row of this little theater, and they're doing a scene where the guy's bringing the girl home for a date or something. Yeah. And he says, "I'm going to stop you right there." Yeah. And he says to the guy, Tony, "Tony, what is your objective in this scene for your character?" And this guy, Tony's like, "Well, I'm going to come home and this girl." And he goes, No, Tony, you want to fuck her cunt." And then everybody goes, "Oh, Jesus, George." And all the women in the class were like, "George." And he turns, I remember this thing, he turns around and he goes, I'm sorry, vagina." And as hilarious as that was, it was also very helpful. It helped me kind of break down, like, oh, yeah, that's... breaking down scenes and all that kind of thing is it's all just about applying logic. And
I need to get better at that as an actor too. Because I just sort of show up in it and, from the lines, I'm like, all right, I know what's going on. But I think if you really put an objective in there in your head, it'll probably hang the words on something a little better.
Yeah, I think, yes, and it probably will. There are all sorts of little things. I feel like it's always just about stuff that you pick up along the way. Yeah. And you hear things here and there. I remember a girlfriend that I had years ago whom I lived with in New York. Yeah. She had done, she did Dead Man Walking. She was in the first bit of that. And she had told me, I heard this secondhand, that Tim Robbins had said, the most important thing is entrances and exits. And that stuck with me as a 25-year-old. I was like, okay, that makes sense. Yeah. And that's always
open big, close big.
Yeah. And it's always been a thing that's kind of in the back of my mind. I don't know if I actually practically apply it every time. And I since have gotten to know him a little bit. And Tim Robbins. And I saw him a year ago. We were shooting in Venice and he came by on his bike. We were chit-chatting. I said, "Hey, by the way, do you remember Missy was in your..." I remember years ago she told me this, and I told him that, and he kind of "Oh, did I?" He didn't even remember. That's not even his thing necessarily.
He thought it was like a Buddha moment. He's like, "Oh, yeah, okay, yeah." But it's weird how things like that makes sense to me. When you walk in, or right when your scene starts, plant yourself, and then take the beats necessary to exit beautifully somehow.
Absolutely. People don't remember everything in the middle. All they remember is you coming in and you leaving.
Especially if it's a laugh line on either of those.
Absolutely.
The exit laugh line, very powerful. Memorable.
Even in life, if I get a decent enough laugh, I'm looking for the exit.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And then, usually you do it, and then you come back, and you're like, I don't know where I was going.
Yeah, everyone's like, "Where the fuck are you going?"
I do.
You're driving this airplane.
Yeah, I do that in fights, too. Fuck this, fuck you, I'm out. And then you walk out, and you're like, where am I going? You're like, hey, I don't know. I'm okay now.
Do you have a lot of fights?
Used to.
You did?
Yeah, I tried to cut back on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was, I had to sort of search myself and figure out what was really going on there. And it was just an insane discomfort with intimacy and the idea that I was being manipulated constantly.
Yeah. Shit, man. I mean, it sounds like you're on top of it. Can I smoke in here?
Yeah. No, what I realized lately, because of the woman I'm with now, is interesting, is that, I'd get upset about something and I'd start a fight, and she says to me, she goes, "You're arguing with yourself. You're just making up all this stuff that I'm doing, and I'm not doing anything." And I had this moment, I'm like, oh, that's kind of true. But you're kind of fucking with me now, though, right?
But you've already kind of had half the argument before you get to the conversation.
Yeah. And, projecting, you're just projecting all these things that they did or they're doing or they're thinking, and it's really all your insecurity. I think you're arguing with yourself.
It's funny you say that. I think I do that. I realize that I sometimes will maybe do a version of that, and then I'll come in and I'll go, "Everything okay?"
Yeah.
And they're like, "Yeah, why not?" And then I'm thinking, "Oh, because we've just had an argument."
Yeah. Well, I went through some shit with you in my head. Where's that? Is there an ashtray that works over there?
This is okay. Did Obama smoke?
No.
Okay, good for him.
He had a tea.
Did he?
Sat there and had a tea. I was hoping he smoked, but he didn't. He didn't smoke. I think he manages it. I think he's a gum guy.
Do you think he's smoking now? Has he had one? Do you think since?
Yeah, I probably. Yeah. I don't know that. I can't assume, but I think he's like got it down because he's got a family and he's older, and it's sort of a hard habit to defend after a certain point.
Oh, it is the worst. I liken it to. I often say that it's like I'm cleaning the gun that I'm going to use to shoot myself with.
Yeah, it's.
Oh, this? Oh no, this.
I'm just.
This is the thing that's going to kill me. Yeah. I'm just getting it ready.
Yeah, it looks good though, right? Feels
great.
good. I eat these nicotine lozenges all the fucking time.
Let me look at these.
They're great.
Nicotine lozenge.
They're
I feel
great.
Like are they?
Oh my God! Like for me, because I'm a fucking drug addict.
Yeah, same.
No, I'm
not drug addict. I'm drunk.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, you're an addictive personality.
Yeah.
But I get I get the buzz. Do you know what I mean? Like if I look forward to it at night. I'm gonna wake up and have one with my coffee, and I'm gonna feel it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like sometimes the gum, it's like you feel it, but then it goes away too quick because you chew it too fast.
But
these, you kind of let them linger in your mouth. Yeah.
It's a good delivery system.
It is. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Good delivery system. So how do you land the first roles? What are they? What happens? Do you think, when did you become Will Arnett? That was Arrested Development, where everyone was like, that's the guy.
I was always him. I was just waiting for everybody else to figure it out.
Yeah, but you did some things that weren't necessarily comedy, no? Or was it always comedy?
No, I did some. Well, first I started working in New York. I was doing a kind of about as far off Broadway one act play, and a girl who worked at William Morris.
Yeah.
In New York back then.
What was the one act play?
It was called Answers.
Yeah.
And it was like about a guy and the cops get him to confess to something he didn't do, and it was like and I played this kind of like
small theater,
tiny theater, like 99-seat theater,
yeah.
And I played this kind of like sort of junky kind of, And by the way, when I was 23, I looked like I was 12.
Yeah,
it was not. But I was applying all my acting.
You were doing it, taking those pauses, working the
God.
chair.
Oh,
yeah,
and. She brought me into William Morris, and while I was there meeting with these agents, and they were going to start sending me out, one of them said, "You should go and talk to the people in the voiceover department," and I said, "Sure. What's that?" And they said, "Have you ever thought about the voices on commercials and stuff?" And I said, "No, it's never occurred to me."
Those are people.
Yeah,
yeah.
Oh yeah, there are voices on commercials.
Yeah.
And I went and I talked to them, and they said, "Well, we're going to start sending you out," and immediately they started, sending me to auditions, and it wasn't very long. I'm going to say probably 2 months into it, maybe.
Yeah.
I got my first gig.
For
a healthcare company out of New England called Harvard Community Health Plan. We're what healthcare should be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they flew me to Boston to record it, which was kind of unusual. But I guess it was because it was a whole radio and television campaign, and they were all there.
Yeah.
It was like kind of 20 commercials that I was recording.
Right.
They brought me up there, and I think they were probably surprised when I walked in.
Yeah.
Because I sounded like an older
guy.
Who
yeah. You've always had that voice. Yeah.
And then I was like a punk kid.
Yeah. But you did it.
I did it. And then I started working a lot in voiceover, and I was able to pay the bills, and then some. And I became the voice of Evian water, and Boston Market, and Lay's potato chips.
Wow.
And Hershey's cookies and cream.
Really? So you were making money?
Yeah. I was making real money, and the funny thing I said recently, actually, it occurred to me I was making like executive level money.
Yeah.
And I would do things like Lockheed Martin. I would do all these weird corporate things like Sunday golf type commercials.
Yeah.
AIM Investments. Invest with confidence.
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
Yeah.
And again, I was like this punk ass kid who was like burning out in New York. And but it was very lucrative, and it meant that I didn't have to have a lot of my friends were waiting tables or whatever, and I didn't have to do that. And I probably got lulled into a sort of a comfort level.
Were you boozing a lot?
Yeah.
Yeah. Was that constant?
No, there were a few years where I wasn't, and then I was in the mid to late 90s. I was, and I was boozing a lot. And I would go to McManus a lot on 7th Avenue and 19th Street. That was my spot.
Oh, yeah?
It ended up becoming like a big kind of after UCB hangout.
It's a shitty little bar, right?
Yeah.
So you were the kind of drinker that was a shitty little bar, but it was still a shitty little bar.
It was before it was like a hangout. It became that because my buddy, Ali Farnakian?
Yeah, I do.
So it was because of Ali used to hang out with. I knew Ali through different guys from North Carolina. And
really?
That's how I kind of met all those sort of UCB people and stuff. And my ex-wife was through Ali.
Oh yeah, I remember him. Doesn't he teach now? And he's like,
he's got his own theater, the Pit.
Right, and I remember there was like period of when, because I remember when the UCB showed up in New York.
Yeah.
I remember when they were doing Luna Lounge with me, and then they started that first theater with the weird seats, the one that Walsh lived on top of.
Oh no, that one. That was the one on 22nd Street. That was their first theater. But before that, they would do ASCAT on Sunday nights upstairs, 17th Street. What the fuck was that place called? And I remember a young Jake Fogelnest being in the front row, and he was just a fan, and him like kind of tittering with his friends.
Yeah.
And I mean, of course, now I've since known Jake for years.
I knew him when his dad used to bring him to comedy shows.
Yeah.
Like when he was like at 10.
Well, I remember, and his dad would be around sometimes back then. And one of my agents from William Morris from back in the day, in 1996, it was like January 96, and he says to me, I've just got this new young comedy troupe from Chicago, and they've moved here.
Yeah.
And they're performing at the West Bank Theater on 42nd Street. The restaurant downstairs, there's a little theater.
Yeah, I remember that.
And it was UCB doing Bucket of Truth, their sketch show.
Yeah.
And it was Walsh and Besser and Ian and Amy.
Yeah.
And they did Bucket of Truth, and that was the first. And it was Peter Principato.
Yeah.
Who's now has been my manager for years.
Still.
I
remember him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he was my agent starting in '93.
I remember when he was an agent.
Yeah.
Him in his leather jacket coming around.
I just spoke to him the whole way here.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Peter had said, you got to go see these guys.
I think I was kind of a dick to him. Yeah, I never really had the social graces to understand how show business worked. I would always go out of my way to be a dick to all the people that could possibly help me.
Sure. That was your badge.
That's what kept me out of the real work for a long time. So wait, so this agent, so you do all these voiceovers. So when do you just start kicking into the acting?
So I did a couple independent films.
Yeah.
And none of them kind of really did anything. And it was back when they were making a lot of independent films all over the place. It was very in vogue. And I got my first kind of really sort of paying acting gig. I did a pilot for CBS, and it was in 96. It was that same winter, 96. I did a pilot for Warner Brothers CBS called Grant and Lee, and Kevin Pollak was the star.
Yeah.
And I was auditioning in New York for pilots, and they saw my tape and flew me out to test for it. It was a big deal. And, I guess I always liked sort of the idea of comedy, but I never really talked about it in that way. I wasn't a stand-up. I didn't come up through sketch. It just didn't seem like something that it just wasn't on my radar.
Right. Yeah.
And it wasn't a thing in New York as much. There was stand-up, certainly. But the sketch thing hadn't
happened yet.
Hadn't really happened, as you know.
Yeah.
And so anyway, I did this pilot, and it didn't get picked up, but I kind of did okay, I think. And then I started auditioning and testing more for pilots. And every year I would sort of I started testing. They would fly me out for 5-10 pilots, and I get really close. And then I did another pilot a few years later for. At this time, I will say I was boozing, and I probably didn't look my best, and was not in the best form.
Yeah, right.
But I could still do my voiceovers and making increasing bank.
Yeah.
So I was like, fuck it, I don't care. And then I had a moment. I was like, all right, I got to get my shit together and kind of pare that down and quit it. But right before that, I did a pilot with my friend Mike O'Malley called The Mike O'Malley Show.
I remember him.
NBC, yeah.
Didn't he famously lose his mind for a minute?
No, that's one of those. That's a story that's kind of taken on its own life. He had, during this show, it was back when they were giving out these big development deals.
Right, I remember.
Yeah.
I had one. Not as big, but yeah.
But yeah, you had one, and lots of people had these.
Yeah.
And Mike had this big deal, and he went to make a movie. From the time we shot the pilot to the time we were shooting the series, he went and made the movie. I think it was 28 days.
It was Yes Dear, right? Wasn't that the?
He ended up being on Yes Dear.
Right.
Yeah.
So he went to make the movie.
And he comes back and he felt like the writing staff had gotten way off of what the original idea was.
Yeah.
And Mike he's still a very close friend of mine and one of the all-time great guys, great people. He's a solid person.
I always see him in things, and he's good. You know, I saw him. He was in Sully. He was good.
He's really good. He's a good actor. He's a really good writer.
Yeah.
But most of all, he's an incredibly good guy.
Yeah.
And he wrote this, what became to be known as a manifesto to all his writers.
Yeah.
Saying, look, I've got this responsibility. He's from New Hampshire. He's, sort of blue collar. Like he took it really seriously that they gave him all this money. He felt a sense of responsibility to do the right thing with his show and make it the best version possible. So
right.
He wrote this thing and really out of a good place. And somebody in the writer's room immediately faxed it to every other writer's room.
Yeah. Leaked it.
And it was then they printed it in the Hollywood Reporter. And he became, and everybody was, he was basically the laughingstock. And I remember the day that happened, and he's like, I fucked up. I guess I shouldn't have given a shit. And he was so despondent.
Yeah.
And I thought, you know what? Fuck everybody else. That's bullshit. He's such a good guy. If there's anybody that did not deserve it, it was him. And he became known as the guy who lost it for a minute. And he, by no means, if there's anybody who never lost it, it's Mike O'Malley.
Yeah. I'm glad he survived. Because it was at that time, I'm sure I was like, oh, geez, that guy.
I know.
Probably had my own resentment about him.
Well, as you know, it's like, it's the, everybody is, in this town especially, it's like, don't let him see you trying. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I did all these things, and then eventually around 2000, I got sober, and I kind of got my shit together.
You've been sober that long?
Well, I had a moment last year where after 15 years, I kind of went out. Because everybody was talking about rosé, and it was never around before.
Rosé?
It's a bit, but I ended up, having a sort of a moment.
For how long was that moment?
Let's call it 6 months, but I don't want to get into the particulars. But
yeah.
And I actually talked about it recently, and I sort of did this interview with the Hollywood Reporter last year, and I kind of mentioned that, and then of course immediately it's like the Daily Mail is like, Arnett hits the bottle, like as if I'm like living under a bridge. I'm like, no, fuck, that's not what happened.
You can't do it. Yeah.
So like you can't talk about it because people just use everything against you.
This is clickbait.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway, that was the moment back then that kind of my
in 2000.
Yeah. Summer of 2000, and that was a sort of a pivotal moment in my life. And then I was living out here briefly in Venice. And
Did you get married? Were you married twice?
Yeah, I got married when I was very young. When I was 24, briefly for a month. It's on my Wikipedia page. I put it on there a long time ago.
Yeah. For a month.
Literally like a month. Yeah. It was one of the. I was 24.
Yeah.
And kind of caught up in the moment. And as soon as we did it, I was like, oh God. Like, I'm not kidding. Like at City Hall in New York.
How long had you known her?
A month.
No.
Yeah, swear to God.
So you knew her a month and you went and got married.
And I wasn't drinking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was just no good.
It was just stupid. It was like.
And she thought it was stupid?
Eventually she did, yeah. Initially she wasn't psyched that I came to Jesus before she did.
Yeah.
But again, I was so dumb. I was 24. I mean, young people are dumb.
No, I know.
And I include myself in that, young people.
You get caught up in feelings. We're sensitive people, people.
Yes.
Yeah, and you're like, this is it. And then you realize, like, well, I learned what not it is.
Yes. And I realized years later, like, oh, I still am capable of making major mistakes.
Hard, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, because, getting to know, like, the patterns.
Yeah.
That's the fucking trick.
Yes.
And then knowing them is one step. Then the next step is, like, don't do that.
Yeah. Well, learning to go, the hardest thing for me to learn how to do was to go take a beat.
Yeah.
Don't be impulsive. And let it sit for a second.
Yeah.
And then react. And, I don't need to have a reaction.
You can do that.
Yeah. I'm better at it.
Yeah. So, all right. So tell me about how Arrested Development happened, because that's like.
So I moved back. I was living in New York now. I moved back to New York.
You want me to check and see if we're at war?
Yeah. Let's see.
I don't got anything. Oh, wait, shit. No, it's Beyonce.
We all agree that Mar-a-Lago is not the Winter White House, right?
Well, we all agree it's not the place to have, national security, confidential, classified briefings at the table
with other diners, other diners around. Yeah, that's not the best way to.
That's not the best way to conduct classified international security issues.
Yeah,
yeah.
I moved back to New York. Amy, my ex-wife, Amy Poehler.
When did you meet her, though? I mean, I know you met her way back, and
I met her way back. We'd sort of met before, and then I met her. I went as Ali Farnakian's date to a dinner to Cafe Lou in New York
in the 90s.
No, this is like late 2000. I'd gone back to New York. We had met before, but this was the first time we were.
And you just gotten sober.
Yeah, yeah. Like 4 months before.
Oh, so that's always a good time to make impulsive decisions.
Yes. Yeah. Well, in my defense, I wasn't really doing. I was just kind of. I'd come back to New York for a couple of weeks. I was visiting my sister, and Ali said, "I'm going to this dinner."
Yeah.
With my buddy Fred Weller and his then girlfriend, now wife, and Ali and my buddy Jack and my friend had gone on a date with Amy, and then she was coming to this dinner, but it wasn't really working out with them.
This is post Matt Amy.
Yeah, post Matt Besser, yes.
Yeah.
And we hit it off, and we chatted the whole night, and then she came to California, and they were doing shows out here that January, and we continued to, and we went out a couple times, and it was great. And then we started dating, and she was basically out here kind of with me, and I did another pilot. She was doing a pilot at the time with Judd called North Hollywood with Jason Segel and Judd Reinhold. And then she got SNL.
Right.
And it was like July of that year, 2001. And she was like, "Should I do this?" Yeah. And it was like a real, I mean, I'm not violating it. It was just, we talked about it and she wasn't sure. And I said, "Yeah, let's go." And so we moved back to New York. Arrested happened like this. So Amy was doing SNL, and
not married yet.
We were not married. We then got engaged.
Yeah,
like a year and a half later, and I did another pilot for CBS, 20th for CBS.
So you're working. I mean, between voiceovers and pilots and guest appearances, I mean, you're making a living, and it's good.
Yeah, I was making a good living, and I was kind of content in a way.
Yeah.
And I was doing a pilot basically every spring.
Yeah.
Seemed like, and I do this pilot though, and it gets picked up, and everybody's kind of celebrating, and I had a bad feeling just about the way that everybody was kind of dealing with me, and I remember saying to Peter Principato, "There's something's up." And he's like, "No, you're crazy. You're paranoid."
Yeah.
And I said, "Yes, I know. But in addition to that, something's up."
Yeah.
And sure enough, I got fired off this pilot, this show called Still Standing that ran for a few years on CBS.
Yeah.
And I remember getting the call from Peter saying, "I don't know how the fuck you knew, but you were right."
Yeah.
And I felt at this point I'd been doing it long enough that I could sense, shit like that.
Yeah.
And I was really mad on a lot of levels. I was disappointed, that I was fired. You feel kind of embarrassed. You feel like people care. Obviously, nobody notices.
Yeah.
But you feel like you feel shitty. And I remember my friend Brian Callen, who's a stand-up.
I know him,
Brian saying to me, "Oh, what? You're mad that you're not going to have one scene a week where you come in and you're the guy who goes, hey, what the hell happened to my couch?
Yeah,
he's like, you should be happy.
Yeah.
They're doing you a favor. And it was, he's like, stop feeling, sorry for yourself. And so that fall, I decided to do a play. There was a guy I had done a reading with a couple summers before in New York Stage and Film up at Vassar. And he was coming to New York and he was doing a play about the tragedy at Lockerbie called The Women of Lockerbie with the New Group in New York. I call Peter Principato and I say, I'm not reading for anything for pilot season. And he's like, don't be. And I said, no, you know what? I'm done. I'm done with being disappointed. And I don't want to have anything to do with it anymore. I'm not going to audition. And boy, the TV business is going to be really missing me.
Yeah.
And then I remember my friends started talking about this script, Arrested Development. And the woman who cast the show that I got fired from the year before, Deb Barilski, when I was fired, sent me a handwritten letter.
Yeah.
And said, which is really sweet. And she said, I thought you were great on the show. I don't want you to, don't take this personally that they fired you. I think they made a big mistake. I think you're a talented guy. And I think it's a real injustice, et cetera, et cetera. And it was very sweet. Nobody's ever done that before or since. And she was casting Arrested Development, Deb Barilski. And she called Peter Principato and she said, there's this part of the brother who's a magician and they can't cast it. And Will should come in and read for it. And Peter called me and I said, you know what? It's very nice of Deb, but I'm not interested. I'm doing this fucking play about the women of Lockerbie. Remember the tragedy over Lockerbie?
Yeah.
And so Deb ended up calling me.
Yeah.
And she's like, you just got to read for it. And I said, fine. And he faxed me the fax rolled paper to our apartment that we had down in Tribeca at the time. And I took the subway up to read, to go to some office on the west side. And
be put on tape by an assistant.
Yeah. And I just read the side. I just got the sides. I don't even have the script.
Yeah.
I might have had the script, but I didn't read it. I was like, fuck that. I'll read the sides.
Yeah.
Put it on tape. Don't think about it. I got a call the next morning. They're like, great. They want you to fly out to California and they're going to make a test deal. And I'm like, Jesus Christ.
It's funny when you don't give a shit. You're like, all right.
Not only do I not give a shit, I go to meet my buddy Giles, who's my oldest buddy, lives here now. And Pete Giles, he and I are at McManus. He's still drinking at the time.
Yeah.
So it's like Friday at 1, and we're playing video golf. We played Golden Tee for hours.
Yeah.
The amount of money and time I put into Golden Tee, I could have gone to law school twice.
Do you golf in real life?
I do, but my golf, these days I hurt my knees. So I'm old. But so I'm playing video golf. I'm playing Golden Tee at McManus with Giles. And Principato calls me again. He's like, listen, man, you gotta go home and sign your test deal. Because you sign a test deal before you audition your final test.
Sure.
They work out your contract.
And then you go before network?
You go before network so that if they want you, you can't go, great, so my price is double.
Right, I get it.
You've already made your deal.
I've been in that situation.
Yeah.
It makes this sort of that fucking, when you got to go in that room full of the network people and everything else and you've signed a test deal, it's just the worst fucking experience.
It's the worst. And if you think about it, if you're an out-of-work actor who doesn't have a lot of dough, you've now got the extra carrot of, you could make X amount of money if you do this right. And if you don't, your year is fucked.
Yeah.
It's terrible.
And you pay your own flights.
Yeah, all that shit.
Yeah.
So he keeps calling me. I'll go home and I'll sign it. The deal was, the studio couldn't look at my tape until I signed my test deal. And they keep calling. And I go, Pete, if they keep calling, they've already looked at it.
Yeah.
I go, why aren't you renegotiating the deal, you fucking, come on. Anyway, I go home, I sign it, I fly out to California. I remember so well that weekend I have a cold. I felt crappy. It was like late February, 2003. And I hang out. I see Brian Callen.
Yeah.
I see him there, and it's like a work session with the Russo brothers and Mitch. And Brian and I read with each other out in the hall at the old TV building over at the Fox lot. And Brian says to me, he's like, you're going to get this. I wouldn't read him with it. I said, no fucking way. He's like, yeah. And I was so jaded. I was like, not happening.
Yeah.
I go in, I work with those guys. It goes kind of okay. Fine. I leave it. I'm sick enough that I still don't care.
Yeah. And you hadn't read the script.
And at this point, I maybe had read the script, but like whatever.
Do you remember liking it or thinking it was?
Yes, it was good.
Yeah.
It was very good. But it also had Mitch had written like a disclaimer on the front, on the cover letter.
Yeah.
saying this is going to be shot handheld. There's going to be it's not going to be business as usual. No trailers. It's going to be all guerrilla style. I remember thinking, fuck you, dude.
Yeah.
What do you think this is? Art? And it's commerce, man. And I go in
jaded.
So jaded
TV
already.
Jaded. Yeah.
TV 33-year-old jaded.
Yeah.
I go in Monday morning and Tony Hale was out there too, who played Buster, and his wife, Martell, at the time was a makeup artist on SNL. I knew Tony a little bit.
Yeah. He
and I read the same morning, also with Jessica Walter, whom I'd done my first pilot with, Kevin Pollak.
Uh-huh.
She played the mom on Arrested. She and I had done that together. And it was just like a weird kind of everything coming together. And I go in and I test, and I got the show. And
that doesn't sound menacing, does it?
No.
Okay, good.
If they're looking for anybody out here, it's you, by the way.
It goes well.
And I stayed in California because we did a table read that night, and I stayed because over the course of the next few weeks we just made.
Do they cast you
Yeah, I go in. I remember going in right before I go in. Mitch is there, and he says, he's like, "You're going to get this." Now it's his show, and I go, "Don't say that."
Yeah.
And I was reading against Alan Ruck.
Yeah.
I think I remember from Ferris Bueller's, and he was on Spin City.
Yeah.
Good actor.
Yeah, he's funny, yeah.
Alan and Rainn Wilson.
Yeah.
I go in first. Then I come out, and I go, again, I'm sick. I go in to blow my nose and wash my hands. I feel terrible. Then Alan comes out in that time.
Yeah.
And then Mitch and everybody comes out, and Mitch is like, "You got it!" To me.
Yeah.
Alan's barely left, and Rainn is still sitting in the thing. And I've been in his position. He's fine now.
Yeah.
But I've been in that position so many times where you're not the guy.
Yeah.
And I said to Mitch, hey, that I knew Rainn to say hi. I said, "Hey, that guy's still there. Go and let him know or get him out of here before we celebrate." I can't. I felt too badly about.
But you'd already read.
They didn't even read him.
But you'd already done.
I'd already read.
Yeah.
I read alone, and then we did a group scene with Tony and Jessica and Jason. And it was it's so funny looking back on that now, and Mitch in those moments. Mitch and I are, has been one of my best friends of my life, and we still work together. And he produces our show Flaked with us, and he's just such a part of my life. And Jason is, from that moment on, we've been like brothers. It's so funny to look back at that actual day.
Yeah, I mean, you guys sort of reinvented television. I mean, it was a completely new thing. People fucking love it. Cross is hilarious. Everyone's hilarious.
Yeah, it was weird. It was such a funny, when we first started, I knew David a little bit from New York.
Yeah.
Not well, but we started shooting that show, and immediately, from the first time we did a big group scene, it felt different. And Mitch is such a brilliant guy, and he's a brilliant writer. He's probably the funniest person I've ever known. You just knew that we were doing something that was, the writing was so good, and that it was funny. But at the same time, that whole first fall before it started to air, it didn't air until November. We started shooting in August. We were making it in a vacuum, and
it was odd. And it was sense odd. That you knew it was different.
We knew it was different, but there was no reaction to it yet.
Yeah.
So we were just making episodes. And there was something kind of freeing about that. There was no pressure to do it one way or the other. And then when people started reacting and liking it, I never even thought about shit like reviews, because I was so concerned with just trying to get a fucking job for so long.
Right.
That was so far down the fucking road.
And you weren't necessarily as invested in the show. You were working.
Yeah.
Exactly. It wasn't on you.
No, it wasn't at all.
Yeah.
And so then it sort of started to pick up steam.
Became a phenomenon.
I guess.
Yeah, definitely.
But at the same time, don't forget, we had 0 ratings.
Yeah.
So, we were constantly, every Monday morning, Bateman and I would be sort of pouring through the ratings and trying to hey, we went up a tenth in girls 18 to 19.
The worst. What do you do?
The worst.
He's a good guy. I talked to him.
Bateman's the best.
Yeah.
And I have so many memories of just him sitting in his little shit trailer with the door open, wearing his stupid Michael
Yeah.
costume with pages.
Yeah.
Back then it was paper.
Yeah.
Going over the ratings.
Yeah. Oh, really?
Yeah. Hey,
Freaking
look!
out? Yeah. I got something good.
We're just holding on to any
So
crumbs.
how did it ultimately, stay on the air?
We got nominated that first. It started airing in November.
Yeah.
And then in December, out of the blue, we got nominated for a Golden Globe.
Right.
And we were like, holy shit, Golden Globe.
Yeah.
And we get to go?
Yeah, hang out.
It was so far removed from everything where I was at.
Yeah.
I guess that's not entirely true. Amy was doing SNL, so she was kind of in a high profile thing. But for me, it just seemed like that was, her gig.
Yeah.
And then after the first season, we got nominated for a bunch of Emmys, and then we won the Emmy for best comedy. And that was so gratifying. I remember before the ceremony, Cross saying, "If we win, we're on the same road. We should get up, celebrate with each, walk out to the aisle, and then go the other way out the theater and get in our cars and leave." And I was like, "That's hilarious." I remember Amy saying to me, "Don't listen to Cross. You cannot do that."
Yeah.
But yeah, it was very validating. It was such a thrill.
Yeah, that's great. And then the ones you did a couple years ago went over well. Everyone was excited.
Yeah, there were people who had complaints. There were a number of reasons that Mitch constructed those shows the way he did.
Yeah.
Some of it had to do with schedule of getting everybody back on board. But I feel like when you go back, the format was that each character had their own episode. Some have multiple episodes, and then everything kind of sort of you could follow. Everything kind of collapsed on itself, and the storylines were all intertwined. I feel like when you actually go back and look at it as a whole, it's a pretty masterful. It's very complex.
Yeah,
what he did, and I spent some time in the writers' room on that, and it was like a code breaking room from World War II. I'm not kidding. It was different colored index cards with different colored pieces of string, sort of denoting character or cause and effect and stuff going back and forth. It was insanity.
Yeah,
and it was like such a window into Mitch's brain, which is scrambled eggs.
Wow, but he pulls it together. He makes the omelet.
He really does, honestly.
So what now? He produces Flaked. That's your show.
Yeah.
You created it.
Yes.
And it's sort of based on...
Well, it's not really based on reality.
Right.
In the sense that story is fictitious.
But you're hip to being fucked up.
Yeah. I'm hip to being fucked up, and I'm hip to... I decided that I wanted to kind of make something that was... I like the idea initially of a guy. I've always liked the idea of a big fish in a small pond.
Yeah.
And so I remember seeing somebody I know being in Venice, and everybody stopping him on the corner, and he's in the program, and everybody's like, "Hey man, what's up?" And like, it was like a business guy and a fucking homeless dude.
Yeah.
And I was like, "How the fuck do you know everybody? Like, what is your deal?"
Right.
And it struck me as being kind of funny. And Venice is, I love Venice, and I've lived there on and off over the years, and it is a place where people go to reinvent themselves. Truly, like you can just go out there and sort of adopt a persona.
Right.
And, we have a character in the show. We didn't really get into it, but there was a guy years ago who we knew. His name was Stefan. And then somebody else said, we were talking about Stefan. They said, I went to high school with him. You mean Steven?
Yeah.
And we're like, holy shit, that's when you're 25 and you just decide, I'm going to call myself Stefan, and everybody else is going to go, and none of these people know me. They don't know my story.
Right.
And you can create this identity. And so I like that. And I think that in a lot of ways, I wanted to get into the idea of who we really are versus who we show the world.
Right.
And that kind of fascinated me.
Yeah.
On a personal level, I started it as a sort of an exploration of things I didn't like about other people. Number one, sort of dishonesty and lying.
Yeah.
And I ended up, it got very sort of murky, and I kind of, it also became an exploration of things I didn't like about myself.
Sure.
At the same time.
Yeah. It's so funny because that process of those resentments that you have against others, like sometimes it can take a while for you to realize, like, oh, this isn't, like we were talking about before, I'm having a conversation with myself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it was tough. It wasn't until I was deep in the process of my writing partner, Mark Chappell, is an Englishman who wrote with, I met him through Cross years ago. He wrote Todd Margaret with.
Oh, yeah, you were on Todd Margaret.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
And so that's how I met Chappie. And who's a Oxford educated Englishman who'd never been to Venice before. And I just pitched this idea to him one night. I was in London, and he's like, yeah, it sounds great. And we just started writing an outline the next day. And he came over here and immersed himself. He's the greatest partner I could ever ask for. As he and I wrote every episode of the first season, and as we were doing it, it started to get heavier and heavier.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I was in the middle of that process I realized what was going on. And there's at the center of it is this guy, Chip, who is this kind of big fish in a small pond, who's created this persona for himself, who's created this kind of cool identity.
Yeah.
And at the heart of it, he is a sober guy who's helping people. I also like the idea of a guy he's helping people by selling this life and this thing, and yet he's not necessarily adhering to it himself.
Right.
But it still works on other people. So is he a bad person?
Oh, yeah.
He's kind of doing the right thing.
Well, I mean, that's where you get into a loop, right?
Yeah. Well, you get into, and people say, well, that's a pretty simplistic way to look at it, but that life is complicated, man.
Right. It is.
There's no black and white answer.
Well, right. And also, like, I think about that stuff a lot. Like, I know that, I can show up for people, but sometimes in my personal life, I'm a fucking, depressed, angry dick.
Yeah.
But what does that mean exactly? That's just like, people are a little complicated.
Yeah. Yeah. People are complicated, and
if the good column outweighs the bad column, you're doing okay.
100%.
Yeah.
And if you can try to own the shit that you've done and go, okay, fuck, I need to try to be better, then I guess that's all you can do.
Now where are you at now that you're about to drop the second season?
Yeah, so we did the first season, and then we started shooting that came out last March, and then we shot the second season. We brought more writers on this year.
And now do you picture an arc? Because like my experience in writing television, I always assume that that these people that write these series can see the whole thing through 4 or 5 seasons or 8 seasons. I didn't have that experience. Are you?
Well, we did. It's funny. One of the criticisms of the first season was that, these guys. Here you have these guys in their mid-40s living in Venice,
and you're like a self-help guy.
Kind of.
Yeah.
He's a big sort of like program guy,
right?
And who, as we find out, he kind of uses it a lot to excuse himself of his own behavior in his real life.
Like anybody uses a spiritual system.
Yes.
That affords you the ability to be forgiven.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah.
My God is very forgiving. No kidding.
Yeah.
Your God forgave you? That's what a coincidence.
Yeah, yeah.
And we always had this, I always pictured that there would be a sort of a fallout to what his behavior in the first season. And it was never an endorsement of that kind of character.
Yeah.
If we never got to make a second season, it might have seemed that way, but we always knew where we wanted to go. And there is a version of going beyond it. I'm not sure it's necessarily something I want to do. It's been a very trying experience for me on a lot of different levels.
Like what?
Well, because just on a purely sort of logistical level, writing it, and acting in it, and show running. Mark and I run it.
Yeah.
And, every decision, every fucking minuscule decision we have to make.
Yeah. And sometimes you just want to act.
Yeah. And sometimes you just want to show up, not like, oh yeah, no, sorry, hang on, the cup should be like this. And the thing should be like this.
Let me see what do you got in the camera?
Yeah.
What's in it? Okay.
Constantly. So there's that, and also just the subject matter itself. I got really close to the bone last year, and I ended up kind of, as a result, kind of blurring the lines. And I'm like, did I do it because I wanted to get closer? Is this method acting bringing it back to Strasbourg?
Yeah.
Was I trying to get closer to what was going on?
Yeah.
Or did I write it as an excuse to do that? I still don't know.
So you're challenging yourself in ways you didn't think.
100%.
Yeah.
This is not how I envision what I envisioned doing to myself at age 45,
right.
46.
There's not, you can't just phone it in.
No, you cannot.
And you've been through a certain amount of life shit to where you're like, this guy's too close to me.
Yeah.
Like, am I revealing too much about myself?
100%.
Yeah.
100%. It got really, it put me in a nervous space for a while, which is probably good, I think, in the long run.
Yeah.
But yeah, I have been through a lot of shit, and a lot of people, have been through way worse shit than I have.
Sure.
But I've been, in my own way, been through my own shit, and I'm sort of at a place now where maybe it's time to lay this one down and let it be. But I'm happy with what we did. We had some great writers this year, and Mark and I still wrote, and I directed this year for the first time, which I've never done.
Yeah, you got to do that when you got the opportunity.
Yeah, I've never been one of those people who's supposed that I can do it.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'd be any good at it,
Well, usually, like, when the thing that you're afforded when you're, in the second season of your own show is, you've got a DP that knows what he's doing, and usually, you can be guided. It's very hard to direct and act because you got to keep running back to the playback machine and do another take. But it's like popping your cherry. You got to do it.
Yeah, and luckily I have Chappie with me, Mark. And, but it was challenging.
It's cool because now, like, at least, you're in the guild, and if you want to direct something that's not you, you can try it.
Yeah.
It's good.
I've thought about it, but who knows?
Yeah. And now, your personal life, you okay? You and the kids are good? And
great.
You get along with Amy? Or
Yeah.
Yeah, it's worked out. It leveled off?
It's worked out. Yeah, everything leveled off, and everything's good, and
co-parenting, like, it's essential that, that shit levels off.
Yeah. You know what? That shit was, to be honest, that shit was always level.
Oh, good.
Yeah. It's always been about the kids.
Good.
And they're everything for me and for her starts every day is, the kids' happiness.
Yeah.
And that's it. And that comes to work, and everybody I work with and everybody I do things with, they all know that that's first and foremost, and then everything else is kind of falls in line after that. Everything else is gravy.
Yeah.
Schedule. I look at everything as it takes me away from my kids. Every job, every meeting, everything.
Yeah.
And so it better be worth it.
And sobriety solid.
Sobriety solid. Took me a minute.
Yeah.
Actually, not really, but it took me a minute to sort of.
But you had a program. I mean, like, when you did go out, you knew where you had to go back to?
1,000,000%. That's the worst part, or the best part.
Yeah.
But it's always there.
Yeah, and you're sort of like,
Yeah, I had enough in me to know, as you're doing it, you can't even really enjoy it.
No, there's no way. I can't imagine it. I can't imagine it.
And the best part is, best/worst part is my friends in sobriety who are great, who would just be like, okay, man.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm like, oh, fuck you.
You're trying to justify it?
Oh,
yeah. No, I'm good now. I mean,
everything's good.
I did some time. I got it.
Yeah. And they're like, okay, man.
We'll see you.
All right, we'll wait.
Yeah.
I'm going to be right here. We got a seat saved for you. And it's funny now, my sort of feeling about it is much more like, God, what a jackass I was. But, again.
Hey, at least you didn't die.
Yes. At least I didn't die. And I consider myself, in that sense, very lucky.
I feel like it's like, to me, that's the most frightening thing, having 17 years and you see these guys that go out after like that long and they don't, it's not good.
No.
It doesn't.
Well, that's the thing. I knew exactly where that goes, and I've seen it enough, and I've been around enough guys, and I've been around the rooms long enough to know the natural progression. It might be okay today.
Yeah.
Here's where it goes.
Right.
So,
yeah. Good. Well, I'm glad you're back, and I'm glad things are working out. I'm looking forward to the new thing.
Thanks, man.